Welcome to the channel, Cheating Secrets. You must be Mrs. Brown. Call me Sandra, please. Are you Mark? Yes, that's me. So what is all this about, Sandra? You said on the phone it was a matter of life and death. It is. Not my life, you understand, but someone I know. I believe you used to counsel my husband. Yes, from time to time over the past 10 years. I hope you understand that we military psychologists follow the same code of ethics as civilian ones. I can't discuss the details of what we talked about. Wow, 10 years. I had no idea it was that long. Of course, I knew he was in the army, but a military psychologist? Your husband was a sniper in the infantry. We see a lot of them here at the clinic. You see, most soldiers fire rifles or something else and never actually see the person they might be shooting. A sniper is different. He can see whether the guy has pimples or not, and he knows exactly who he's hitting and what his bullet does to them. So Dave killed people. Mark suddenly noticed the color drain from the clearly frightened woman's face, so he poured her a glass of water before continuing. Oh yes, Sandra. And not just enemy soldiers. As you know, during the last Middle Eastern fiasco, in the shelters where the Australian army was deployed, there wasn't just one side in uniform shooting at other guys in different uniforms. Most of the enemies wore civilian clothes and, they didn't hide the fact that they used children to deliver grenades and rockets. Your husband's job was to lead his team and protect them from all threats, if you understand what I'm saying. Sandra truly read between the lines of what the khaki-clad counselor was telling her, and now she understood why her quiet, gentle husband needed help. Still, she was deeply unsettled by how much she didn't know about him. Dave never told me anything about his time over there. Oh, he wanted to, he really needed to. But from what he told me, you were quite overwhelmed with your own troubles at the time, and he didn't want to burden you with his problems. But why have you come to talk to me now? He said your troubles seem to be over and that he's planning to open up to you. I've done just about all I can. Now he needs someone he loves, and who loves him, to help him open up. He needs acceptance of his past. I can tell you, he's been waiting eagerly for that from you. I don't think I'm breaking confidentiality by saying that carrying all that pain has really been weighing on him. No. Tell me, did he talk about me, recently? No. I haven't seen him in about a month. Oh God, this is really awkward. What if I gave him bad news? Could he become violent? He threatened to kill someone close to me. I need to know, is he seriously capable of doing that? I'm walking a fine line here, Sandra, but without knowing the full details, I'd say no. Dave's reaction and his military experience, if anything, have made him more gentle than he used to be. It would take something truly serious to cause him to regress to his past, to a time when he had to kill without remorse to protect what he valued above all else. Can you tell me what bad news you gave him? I have plenty of time, I'm done with clients for the day, and my wife is leaving town this week. He waited patiently as a kaleidoscope of emotions flickered across the face of the attractive woman. At the core of it all was pure, unmistakable fear. He guessed that whatever she had told Dave was humiliating for her, but that didn't stop her from seeking the inner peace she so clearly craved. At last, she was ready. I don't know what Dave has told you about me. My problems. Just start from the beginning, Sandra. From the moment you met him to the moment he made the alleged threat. I met Dave 8 years ago. I immediately knew he was my soulmate. We got married a year later. At the time, I was working as a waitress, but I always wanted to start a different career. Dave supported me. We kind of had an informal deal, I would work for a few years, and then I'd have the children we both wanted. Everything was going according to plan, but a couple of years later, my mother got sick, breast cancer. She had a double mastectomy, chemotherapy, and all of that, but eventually, she died. Dave was so attentive to me. He helped me get through it. I suppose that's what you meant when you said he was so busy supporting me that he didn't have the chance to tell me about his past, about his own struggles. Mark nodded and waited. I got tested for the breast cancer gene, and they found that I had it. Even though they caught my mother's cancer early, it didn't help her. Dave supported my decision to have both breasts removed. I just couldn't live with the fear of dying. It was classified as an elective surgery, so our insurance didn't cover it. Dave wanted me to have the best surgeon possible, so when I didn't have enough savings from my job, he didn't hesitate to cover the difference. Sandra fell silent as long-buried painful memories consumed her. Was it hard? Incredibly. Although the surgeon insisted on a consultation before I went through with the operation, it wasn't until afterward that it really hit me. I felt like I was no longer a woman. I'm afraid Dave hasn't had any, intimacy for a long time. I just couldn't bear the thought of him seeing me or touching me naked. The idea of having children was put on hold while I tried to come to terms with everything. Yes, Dave did talk about that time. But he understood everything. Not many women have such a patient and understanding man as you do. Sandra lowered her eyes, as the truth of that statement struck hard against her deeply guilty conscience. The counselor gently encouraged her to continue. So, you decided to have breast reconstruction? Yes. We couldn't really afford it, but Dave refinanced his house to pay for everything. He wanted me to have the same size as before, said he loved me just the way I was, but I decided on a little upgrade. I went from AB cup to AD. I had the enhancement about 8 months ago. I was sick for a couple of months, which meant poor old Dave still wasn't getting any. But it gave me the confidence to return to work. I even got promoted. Once again, Sandra fell silent, lost in deep thought. Mark decided it might be helpful to fill in a few blanks for her. Yes, that was around the time Dave started coming to see me once a week. His own issues were getting worse because he was so focused on helping you. He was really waiting for you to get better so he could finally talk about his own problems. Well, looking back, he did seem a bit down over the past month or so, and his nightmares got so bad that I asked him to sleep in the guest room. The counselor's impression that this woman was entirely self-centered grew stronger. He steered the discussion back to the main issue. He had it all planned out, you know. He was going to rent a cabin in the woods for a week and unload everything. How did it go? A terrible sense of dread washed over Mark as Sandra dropped her chin to her chest and began to cry. He gave her time to pull herself together. Yes, it was this week. He was acting secretive, but he took a week off, and we left last Friday. He seemed disappointed that I would only stay for the weekend. And did he confess? Did he tell you about that time when? No. He wanted to talk about something, but I spoke first. And may I assume that what you told him is the reason we're here today? Sandra nodded. There were so many signs of guilt that Mark didn't even need her to fill in the details. But she had to say them herself. The words had to be spoken. He waited. Dave clearly hoped we would reconnect as husband and wife on Friday night. He cooked a wonderful meal, lit candles, the whole thing. But I just couldn't do it. Mark remained silent, waiting for the inevitable and horrifying confession he knew was coming. I told you that I had the enhancement 8 months ago, and I was sick for a couple of months after that. I didn't sleep with my husband even after the pain was gone, because my lover told me not to. Sandra didn't dare look Mark in the face. She couldn't bear the judgment she might, or even should, have seen there. Not that it would have made a difference. Thanks to everything he had seen and heard throughout his career, Mark had learned to hide his own feelings and emotions. When Dave first came to him, completely broken, describing how he had to shoot a teenager who was clearly lying in ambush, waiting for the soldiers Dave was protecting, his hand hidden beneath an oversized coat, Mark had remained outwardly composed. His patience deserved that. Dave had sat in the very same chair his wife now occupied. Maybe Sandra should have looked up. It couldn't have been worse than the self-condemnation raging inside her own mind. Her betrayal had already weighed heavily on her conscience. Now she knew her husband had been silently battling demons of his own all along, and that was devastating. The silence dragged on uncomfortably. I saw Dave preparing the cabin, and I knew I had to stop him from getting what he wanted. I had planned to tell him what I had done, but not for another couple of weeks. I decided to tell him right away instead of waiting. I had to. I couldn't come up with a valid reason not to sleep with him. I was just lucky he hadn't pressured me earlier. After all, the pain from my surgery had been gone for several months. Sandra fell silent again. Mark found that his growing contempt for this woman was making him impatient. The rumbling in his stomach also reminded him that he hadn't eaten since breakfast. What was the bad news, Sandra? Sandra felt the need to justify her actions, so she paused to collect her thoughts and plan her words. After the breast augmentation, I became the center of attention for a lot of men. It's remarkable what 2 cup sizes can do to some of them. I met a guy, a friend of a friend. His name is Joe. No, never mind his name. Mark noticed that at that moment, Sandra glanced over her shoulder at the empty parts of the room. Strange, he thought. We talked. At first, we just hung out with friends, and then it was just the 2 of us. He told me his mother had also died of breast cancer. Honestly, we had so much in common. I started making excuses to Dave, telling him I had to work late or be somewhere else on the weekends. He trusted me, so he never asked any hard questions. At least she has the decency to look embarrassed for betraying the trust of a good man, Mark thought. The strange thing about personal tragedy is that it can drive a wedge between you and other people. Even though Dave held my hand through my mother's death and all my surgeries, I felt like he never really understood what I was going through. Joe, this guy had gone through such similar experiences that it felt like he could finish my sentences. We became very close. Sandra paused to blow her nose. Mark was growing increasingly impatient as he listened. When did all this happen, Sandra? I met him about 6 months ago. So, that would have been roughly a month after the augmentation. Well, I don't need to know any more about your relationship with this man. It's clear you developed an emotional affair with him. Thank God it didn't become physical. From what Dave told me about you, I know you had an agreement, that you would ask for a divorce before becoming physically involved with anyone else. A sudden sob from the woman in front of him sent a chill down Mark's spine. He knew how deeply damaged Dave Brown was, and suspected, even without knowing the full details, that his wife was as well. Could she really have hurt him that badly? He went numb, terrible thoughts screaming through his mind. It was hard to maintain his professional facade. Sandra whimpered, her face turned toward the floor. It was time to end this. He had a duty, to the army, and to Dave. Tell me, Sandra. What exactly did you say to Dave in the cottage? There was authority in his voice that allowed no room for defiance. Sandra answered instinctively. As I said, I wasn't ready for that conversation on Friday. I made the decision to change the plan on the fly. And I told Dave that I didn't love him anymore and wanted a divorce so I could marry someone else. What was his reaction? Well, he went cold and empty. He said he thought he was my soulmate. Then he asked me if I had slept with the guy. Mark felt his growing sense of dread intensify. So much depended on the answer this woman had given her husband, and he knew it. What did you say to that, Sandra? I didn't answer. I couldn't hurt him like that. In the end, I said nothing. He must have known anyway. That I slept with John. I mean, we were in love. Dave just turned away from me. I think he might have cried. I waited for him to process it all so we could talk about the separation. I guess I gave him 5 minutes and was about to hug him when he turned to face me. It was terrifying. Whoever was looking at me, it wasn't Dave. I didn't recognize a single mannerism or facial expression. Even his eyes looked like they were a different color. Mark saw Sandra shudder. He said nothing, because in that moment, he couldn't afford to speak. If I thought his face was frightening, then his voice, when he spoke, sounded like the lid of a stone sarcophagus sliding open. It was chilling. What did he say, Sandra? It's important to be precise. Tell me exactly what he said. Do you remember? Oh, I remember perfectly. That's why I'm here. What did he say? Like I said, it was like someone else, someone I had never met before. You'd better believe you're closer to the truth than you'll ever fully understand. Sandra continued as if Mark hadn't said a word. It was terrifying. He just looked at me with those dead eyes and said, "Do you really think I'll let you ride off into the sunset with your lover and live happily ever after? There's no place in this country, or anywhere else, where you can hide. I'll find him, and I'll kill him." Then he demanded the name of my lover, but I didn't answer. He just grabbed my phone and drove off. He left me stranded at that cabin in the woods. It took me 6 hours to get home. Some of Dave's things were gone, and I checked, all our bank accounts were closed, none of my cards work anymore. I can't call to warn John, his number was saved in my phone, but I can't remember it. I'm not worried about Dave finding John through my call log, because I almost never called him from my mobile or home phone. His name is in there, along with 40 or 50 others. I don't want to call any of our mutual friends to pass a message to John, in case Dave is somehow watching me. I think he's watching the house. I can't even go to John's place to warn him. I'm trapped, and I don't know what to do. I can't reach my partner without putting him in danger from my husband. I live in terror that John will come to my house after failing to reach me. That's why I came to you. I need to see John, but I can't do it without putting him at risk. Should I be afraid? Is Dave really capable of doing what he said he would? Sandra stopped and looked at the counselor with wide, pleading eyes, hoping he would tell her she didn't have to make the worst decision of her life, never seeing the man she loved again. And yet, that was the path she was willing to take, rather than expose him to a vengeful husband. Even though she knew she would never find true happiness with anyone else for the rest of her life. Mark's professional expression shifted, and his voice revealed his despair as he watched all his hard work with Dave Brown unravel. I believe there's a strong possibility that such a shock could send him straight back into sniper mode. He might feel the need to protect his unit, meaning you and himself, his team, by eliminating your lover. And yes, I believe that, for Dave, revenge itself would be swift, almost therapeutic. A sudden wave of anger surged through Mark, and he stared at Sandra with condemnation. Years of work had gone into rebuilding Dave Brown into a stable, functioning citizen. And the self-centered woman sitting in front of him had shattered all of it, in 6 months and one conversation. His usual professional demeanor broke. Over the years, he had formed a bond with his patient and had truly believed they were nearing a breakthrough. Now, all of it lay in ruins, crushed and scattered in the dust. You stupid, self-centered adulteress. What have you done? I'm surprised your husband didn't strangle you on the spot. Probably the only thing that stopped him was some lingering love for you. Say goodbye to John, because I'm telling you, he won't live 30 minutes once Dave finds out where he is. Get out of my office, you piece of trash. Hey. You can't talk to me like that. I can talk to you any damn way I want. You didn't come here as a patient, you came here as a private citizen. And you've probably destroyed one of the most decent men I've ever known, just because you couldn't keep your promises, or your damn legs, closed. The last time I saw him, Dave walked out of here with a sense of purpose I'd never seen before. And now, you've destroyed him. The woman, pale as a ghost, remained seated, staring at him in disbelief. The half-minute it took her to decide to leave gave him enough time to cool down. As she opened the door, he felt compelled to offer her a final piece of advice. You're in serious danger. Once Dave finalizes the divorce, he may very well come after you. You better pray he finds your lover first, That way, his sense of righteous justice might be satisfied early. But he will come for you. Personally, I think you deserve everything that's coming to you. I despise you. Even more blood drained from Sandra's face as she leaned against the doorframe, not only because she now had confirmation that both she and John were in real danger, but because of the sheer contempt this member of the healing profession clearly felt toward her. She was stunned that what she had told him had caused his professional demeanor to collapse so completely. She stepped out of the office, hoping her car still had enough fuel to get her home. Despite what the counselor had said, Sandra never felt that she was in danger from Dave. But she was absolutely terrified for John. Her conscience also weighed heavily on her. To calm her nerves, she reached for the top shelf of the wine cabinet. As the wine began to relax her, she longed for the sound of her lover's voice. The thought of putting him in danger sobered her quickly. If she didn't reach out to him soon, he would surely come looking for her, and in doing so, he might expose himself if the place was being watched. To protect him, she had to contact him. But contacting him meant putting him at risk. She ran through every possible way to reach him in her head again. She couldn't call John directly. First of all, she couldn't remember his number. She had always relied on her contact list. He didn't have a landline, and directory services wouldn't provide mobile numbers. Besides, if she called him from her home phone, Dave might somehow trace it. Damn it. The same went for calling a mutual friend to pass along a message to John, that would lead Dave straight to him if he was listening in. Visiting John's house was the deadliest idea of all, and she dismissed it immediately. After 2 large gulps, the alcohol worked its magic. She found a way to contact John. The method was so low-tech that it hadn't even occurred to a modern, tech-savvy woman of the 21st century at first. Grabbing a pen and notepad, she wrote a letter to her other half. To hold back the tears, she kept drinking. Right after sealing the letter in an envelope and writing down the address, Sandra passed out on the couch. She would buy a stamp and send the message tomorrow. 3 days later. John dropped the letter on the floor, angry, disappointed, and slightly afraid. It had been in his mailbox when he returned home from a week-long trip. Furious, he grabbed the same kind of sherry that Sandra had used to calm herself the night she wrote the letter. Recalling what Sandra had written, he glanced into the darkness beyond his living room window, closed the curtains, then, taking the opened letter and the uncorked bottle, headed into the kitchen to help himself decide what to do. He took a sip from one and began rereading the other. My dear John, I'm writing to tell you about the disaster that happened last Friday. I'm afraid it's over between us, and we will never see each other again. I came home last Friday, and my husband had packed a bag for me and took us to a cabin he had rented in the woods. He went to great lengths to make the trip romantic, and it was clear he wanted us to reconnect physically. I just couldn't do that to you. It felt like cheating. So, I told him about you, about how we love each other, how we complete each other's souls. Then I asked him for a divorce so that you and I could be together forever. He said nothing. Well, I knew he wouldn't take it well, but I thought maybe he'd just accept it to make me happy. He asked me if I had slept with you, and since I hadn't rehearsed a lie, he knew I had. That's when he threatened to find you and kill you. You would have had to see the look in his eyes to understand how serious he was. He left me at the cabin and drove off with my phone. If he, or some unfamiliar man, calls or texts you, just pretend we vaguely know each other from work or something like that. By the time I got home, all our accounts had been frozen and the cards cancelled. I'm living off what I had in my wallet and what I've borrowed from friends. Dave has obviously contacted some of them, because I've received a few calls and messages saying they were thinking about me. On Monday, I found out that Dave had been seeing a psychoanalyst about his military service. I went to him to ask if he thought you were in danger. He said yes. In fact, very much so. Apparently, Dave might have snapped after seeing something in the Middle East. My love, I'm heartbroken that I've put you in this kind of danger. I know you'll forgive me, because everything I did was to try to make it possible for us to be together forever. I think you have two options, my love. You can accept the danger, come with me, and we can run away together, hide somewhere, or live openly if you're willing to take the risk. You could find a way to neutralize Dave so that he no longer poses a threat. I can't think of any way to help with that. Or you can decide that the risk is too great, and we end it right here, never seeing each other again. I'm listing that as an option knowing full well that, to you, it will sound like complete nonsense, my love. If you love me even 1/10 as much as I love you, the mere thought of never seeing me again will be unbearable. The only good thing about this situation right now is that, for the first time, I can openly wear the wedding ring you gave me. I love it as much as I love you. If the worst happens, it will always be a symbol of our love to me. Think carefully, my dearest John. I hope you'll find a way around this, but if you can't, I will accept our separation as the price I must pay for your safety. Goodbye, maybe forever, my sweet, sweet John. I love you. Your Sandra. John dropped the letter to the floor again. He knew he could always choose option 3, walk away, and walk away fast. Leave even tomorrow. To hell with Sandra's husband. Having never gone to college, John had learned early in life to use his looks and bedroom skills to supplement his meager income as a seducer. He had a perfected technique: find a wealthy wife, seduce her, convince her she was the love of his life, talk her into divorcing her husband, and then walk away with as much money as possible. His bank account now had a healthy 6-figure balance. Like many other things in business, John knew that the secret to success lay in research. Through mutual friends, he had learned everything he could about Sandra, right down to her favorite drink. Once he found out her mother had passed away, a few hours of research on breast cancer gave him just enough knowledge to convince his target that he knew all about it from his own mother, who had supposedly suffered from the same disease. Using that shared connection, he drove a wedge between her and her husband. He understood her better than her husband did. He loved her more than her husband ever could. Once the emotional connection was established, getting her into bed and essentially pushing the husband aside was relatively easy. He had almost reached the point where he was going to reveal the affair to her clueless husband himself, when, in John's absence while he was pursuing his next target, that foolish adulteress went and confessed everything to her husband. Well, John thought, I suppose my own greed is to blame. Still, the next target was worth it, wealthier, more beautiful, and most importantly, even more trusting than Sandra. She would fall for him soon enough. It rarely failed, and it cost him almost nothing. Of course, over the years, he'd taken a few black eyes and broken noses from enraged husbands, but usually, that only helped drive a deeper wedge between the husband and wife. It also often worked in the wife's favor, earning her more than her fair share of the marital assets, especially if her husband ended up in jail. John had a clear conscience about what he did. After all, gold diggers had existed since the dawn of time. And yet, he was irritated that tomorrow he'd have to leave his bachelor apartment and relocate quickly. That guy really did seem like he could be a psycho. Still, it could work in his favor. The new place would bring him closer to the woman in the neighboring town he'd been courting for weeks. That's where he had been all week. He was on the verge of getting her into bed, and he knew that once that happened, her marriage would collapse, likely with plenty of screaming, but swiftly nonetheless. He knew it was greedy to juggle multiple targets at once, and that it limited how thoroughly he could research each one, but the payoff promised to be substantial. In a way, letting go of Sandra simplified things. Even so, he was still furious about the time and effort he'd wasted on her. Pushing the inappropriate letter aside, John poured himself another glass as his thoughts drifted back to memories of that day. He had seen a woman who strongly reminded him of the girl he'd lost his virginity to. It wasn't her, just a look-alike. Still, it stirred some very warm memories. He decided to look her up in his old high school yearbook. John hadn't accumulated many possessions over the course of his life. He preferred to travel light and be able to disappear within an hour. Still, he had kept a few personal items, his childhood scrapbook, his old scout scarf, and his yearbook. Taking it from the closet in his bedroom, he brought it to the kitchen and sat down at the table. Before opening it, he turned it over in both hands and blew the dust off, smiling in anticipation of a pleasant stroll down memory lane. The dust rose into a small cloud. It revealed something that confused John for a few seconds, and then filled him with primal terror. Strangely, it didn't trigger a flight reflex. He instantly understood that any attempt to run would be pointless. All he could do was stare at the red laser beam glowing through the swirling dust particles. The beam had entered through the kitchen window, angled downward at about 30 degrees, ending squarely in the center of his chest. The end of Dave. Years later, Dave Brown still believed that the absurd image he had witnessed through the optical scope of his black market rifle was one of the funniest things he'd ever seen. The color drained from the victim's face, the book slipped from hands that had suddenly gone weak. He had been watching the target as it dropped to its knees, and from his elevated vantage point, he had a clear view of the dark, spreading stain on the front of the man's pants. The turmoil inside Dave Brown's mind since his wife's betrayal was so intense that words alone could never do it justice. His guilt over who he had become during his service in the Middle East, and over what he had been forced to do, had reached a breaking point in recent months, as evidenced by his constant nightmares. There was another source of guilt as well. By hiding his full story, he had ensured that Sandra, the most important person in his world, could never truly know who he was. To her, it seemed like he was always keeping something from her. He wanted to bare his soul, once and for all. But despite all she had suffered recently, he remained silent. He compared his need to confess to a festering boil. To relieve the pain, he had to lance it. He needed to release the poison with words. Words that he needed to say to Sandra. Until recently, he knew he couldn't do that with her. But when he finally believed that she was strong enough to understand everything, he prepared, both mentally and physically, to reveal who he really was. The anticipation of the relief he hoped to feel had grown in his mind during the weeks it took him to prepare for the confession. The fear that she might no longer love him once he told her about the things he felt he had to do was overwhelming. The depth of his shock when she deflected his revelations froze him to his core. He couldn't even remember what he had felt or said before fleeing that dreadful cabin. All he remembered was that he had to either run, or destroy the source of his pain. But the emotion that had grown, transformed, and evolved in the hours that followed was painfully clear to him: revenge. His world had been attacked. Defense, at any cost, was now his only focus. He held himself back from destroying Sandra, only because he was still sane enough to remember the love he once felt for her. He still felt a faint trace of it, but it was fading, day by day. The creature who had defiled her, and that damned love, was, however, a very viable target. So he did what snipers do best. Yes, he was a sniper. One thing the military did exceptionally well was match the right personality to the right role. Patience and cunning were the sniper's art. Finding no useful clues in Sandra's contact list and unwilling to interrogate her friends, Dave disappeared into the urban landscape and began watching his former lover. He waited for her to lead him to the target. He followed her to the counselor's office but didn't approach Mark. If the counselor had done his civic duty, he would have contacted military authorities, perhaps even the police, to warn them about a potentially dangerous man in their midst. But no. Dave simply followed the adulteress back to their home and continued his surveillance. Later that night, when the sniper slipped into his former home, he found what he was looking for. Opening a letter from Sandra's purse with steam, he read its contents to confirm the target. Then he retrieved his rifle from its hiding place and began the hunt. For 3 days, he waited patiently, hidden in the brush behind the target's house, moving only at night to eat, waiting for John to return. 3 days is a long time to think, and Dave thought through everything. He felt a sense of joy imagining his high-velocity bullet tearing through the man who stole other men's wives. He considered where he might flee to avoid spending the rest of his life in prison. But all of that dissolved the moment he looked at the pathetic creature kneeling in a puddle of his own urine in the kitchen. New thoughts erased 3 days of anticipation. The guy simply wasn't worth it. Life was precious, even the lives of disgusting parasites. The sniper no longer needed to protect his team. There was no team anymore. The Dave and Sandra unit was shattered and forgotten. He was a team of one now. And his new mission was to protect himself. Removing his finger from the trigger, he made the weapon safe, erased all traces of his presence, and vanished into the night. He noticed a lightness in his step and felt a sense of pride for finally overcoming his inner demons. The end of Sandra. After sending the letter to John, Sandra continued to live in fear for her lover's life. After work, she would rush home and check the messages on the landline, terrified that John might have left a voicemail with his name. Maybe he had sent her a message on the cell phone, which was presumably still in Dave's hands. She began hovering between the phone and the front door, the first, so she could intercept any message before John revealed his identity, the second, so she could bring him inside quickly and hide him from danger. On the day the letter was likely delivered to John's house, Sandra grew increasingly anxious, more and more certain that John's love for her would overcome any fears he had for his own safety. In her romantic mind, the worst thing she could imagine was that she and John might die together when he came for her and her unhinged ex struck them both down. It was almost worthy of a Shakespearean tragedy. When 3 days had passed since the letter should have arrived and she still hadn't heard a word from John, Sandra's delusion that his return from his latest sales trip might have been delayed began to crumble. Two possibilities began to solidify. First, Dave had already taken his revenge on John. Second, John's fear had outweighed his love. In Sandra's sleepless mind, she couldn't decide which was worse. She constantly scoured every media outlet she could find for news of any assaults on local men. By the weekend, when it had become obvious that Sandra had lost John, her friends started to worry about her. Well, the few friends who hadn't abandoned her over her betrayal of Dave. 2 of them invited her to join them at a bar, where they introduced her to their new acquaintance, Susan. After 5 sips, Sandra slipped into a sentimental state, rhetorically asking her friends how a man who had bought her such an expensive ring, a multi-carat diamond, could abandon her so easily. Susan asked to see the ring, and after examining it, fell silent, which struck everyone as odd. Only after persistent prodding from the others did she reveal the reason for her silence. She explained that she worked at a jewelry store and knew her stuff. A genuine 18-carat gold ring with a multi-carat diamond would be worth thousands. The ring Sandra had, gold-plated, with a fairly convincing piece of glass, worth not even a tenth of that. Utterly humiliated, Sandra stormed out of the bar, jumped into her car, and headed home, straight into the waiting arms of the DUI patrol, as it turned out. The cops were more than happy to meet her. Her fury sustained her through the early part of the arrest process, right up until the officer began reading her rights and officially charged her. She was taken to the station, booked, given a blood test, and then released. The next day, she walked to retrieve her car, full of shame. The first place she went was John's apartment. There was no car in the driveway, and from the look through the window, it was clear he was gone. Apparently, John had left in a hurry. Next came a visit to the place where John had claimed to work, only to be met with firm denials that anyone by that name had ever been employed there. This infuriated Sandra. The deep humiliation of realizing she had been played for a fool, despite the pride she took in her own intelligence, filled her with burning rage. But as her fury at John reached its peak, a different feeling began to creep in, a disgust with herself. Once, she had fully justified the betrayal of her husband. Now, it was clear it had been a shameful, petty act. Sandra understood, from her own actions and the look on Dave's face the last time she saw him, that reconciliation was no longer possible. She decided to punish herself by not contesting the divorce and by refusing to claim any part of their marital assets. To soothe her conscience, she wrote Dave a long letter of apology. It included detailed information about her former lover. Sandra secretly hoped Dave would kill John in a way that couldn't be traced back to him, but gruesome enough that she could urinate on the corpse. Hoping Dave was still spying on her, Sandra left the letter out in plain sight on the kitchen table. For the next week, Sandra's life fell into a miserable routine: go to work, seething with anger at having been played for a fool. Come home, find the letter untouched, and drink until the room spun. In that state, she could still convince herself that John had bought her the best ring he could afford, that maybe she had simply misheard him when he told her where he worked, and that he was just lying low, planning their escape. By the next day, she'd be filled with conflict and confusion, until the cycle began all over again. She hadn't seen John in 2 weeks when she stumbled upon a possible solution to her problem. It was clear that John had left his apartment, but she had another way to find him. Then Sandra remembered an interesting detail: when they were together, John had insisted that they install phone tracking software. At the time, she had been puzzled by his motivation. Now, she understood: he had likely known even then that they wouldn't be together for long. One Friday, when she came home and discovered that all of Dave's belongings were gone, she found her phone sitting on the kitchen table. After adding minimal credit to her account, she checked for messages from John. There were none. She ignored all other messages. Sandra opened the Find My Phone app and saw that John's phone was 50 kilometers away, in another city. Turning off her own phone to save battery and avoid alerting the target, she jumped into her car and headed for the location. It was around 8 in the evening when she turned her phone back on to pinpoint the exact location of what used to be the great love of her life. It led her to a cozy little restaurant just outside the city. Walking around the outside, peering through the windows, she spotted John in a far corner. He was sitting across from an attractive, well-dressed woman, older than Sandra. A large, sparkling engagement ring sat beside a bright wedding band on the woman's left ring finger. Any lingering doubts about his feelings for Sandra vanished the moment she saw him reach across the table, take the woman's hands in his, and gaze lovingly into her eyes. Sandra remembered clearly when she used to receive that kind of attention. The woman shook his hands off and glanced nervously around the room. Sandra also noticed something she had never seen while she was with him. When the woman's attention drifted elsewhere, John's face returned to a neutral expression, only to instantly light up again with a radiant smile when her gaze returned to him. Sandra realized this man was a predator. She suspected that seducing married women was his specialty. She never figured out the rest, that he deliberately destroyed marriages to profit from divorce settlements. That would have made her feel even more foolish than she already did. She just kept staring through the window, recognizing every familiar movement of the man she once thought she loved. Realizing he was in the middle stages of seducing his next victim, Sandra was torn between jealousy and the urge to warn the woman about what she was getting into. She decided not to barge in and confront John and his target right away. The rage she felt could easily have gotten her arrested for assault. No, she told herself, she'd wait until the woman was alone to tell her what kind of snake was stalking her. Sandra returned to her car, turned it to face the exit, then sat and waited. When John eventually walked the attractive woman to her car, Sandra struggled with the temptation to run him over. If she could hit only him, she might have done it. The couple approached a Lexus parked next to John's car. In the darkness, Sandra saw John embrace the woman and kiss her deeply. She didn't try to pull away. Based on what she assumed was the early stage of their relationship, Sandra figured that if the woman had resisted, John would have acted like the perfect gentleman, not pushed the moment. Clearly, he was very good at playing his game. Sandra watched as he opened the door of the Lexus for her and wished her good night. He stood there waving until she disappeared from view. Then Sandra started her car and followed his latest victim. Her plan was to wait until the woman got home and then tell her a few hard truths. That plan unraveled when the woman drove straight through a pair of slowly opening iron gates leading to a mansion that looked like it came out of a magazine. The gates were nearly shut by the time Sandra reached them. She watched as the car disappeared behind the enormous house, several hundred meters beyond the entrance. She sat there, unsure of what to do. Eventually, deciding that she owed the woman at least a small warning, Sandra reached into the glove compartment and pulled out the notepad Dave had once left there for logging car maintenance. She began to write. Given the cramped space, she stuck to the basics: the hand-holding, the kiss, and the fact that she herself had been John's last victim, and it had cost her a good marriage. Folding the pages, she stopped by the mailbox and slipped them inside. She drove away with a slightly clearer conscience, but still deeply saddened by how easily she had been deceived. Her guilt over what she had done to Dave continued to chip away at her belief that she was a decent person. She began drinking to quiet her demons. Her demons were the knowledge that she had betrayed a good man who had needed her. Her work performance declined, and combined with her DUI license suspension, it was only luck that she kept her job, though now at a lower position. Due to a lack of funds, she was forced to sell the house. In a depressed market, she barely broke even on the deal. The last thing she packed was an unopened letter addressed to Dave. With no parents, being an only child, and a rapidly shrinking circle of friends, Sandra had grown cynical about life in general, and men in particular. She never trusted the motives of any man who showed interest in her. At one point, her disinterest in men convinced her that she might be a lesbian. That lasted until the morning she first woke up with a hangover. Losing faith in herself led her to choose losers as partners, and then convince herself that she deserved whatever mistreatment they gave her. Some of them cheated on her, and she found herself subconsciously welcoming the pain. By the time she found a friend who helped her get her life back together and led her to a decent man, it was already too late to have children. When her end finally came, she was at peace, though undeniably alone. Sandra never saw Dave again. All she knew was that one day she came home from work and found all his belongings gone. She never saw a single cent of their money again. 10 years later, she did see his photo in the national press. It was part of a story about him receiving a national award for innovation. In the photo, he looked heavier and happy, surrounded by a smiling wife and laughing children. Sandra let out a sigh, partly for the lost memories, and partly from the quiet certainty that, at last, she could stop looking over her shoulder for the first time since that awful month. The end of John. Unfortunately for John, the hastily scribbled letter that Sandra pushed through the mansion's mailbox slot was not read or taken as a warning by the intended recipient. It was found by her husband, a large, jealous man who had climbed the ranks in the construction business. A man raised to believe that most problems could be solved with fists and steel-toe boots. After threatening his wife, he forced her to reveal everything she knew about her new acquaintance. She then contacted John, arranging to meet the next night in a secluded location, supposedly to further their relationship. The following day, John was found with a battered face, broken ribs, and a severely damaged groin, beyond the hope of recovery. A local reporter who covered the story in their small community did an excellent job investigating the attack. The resulting publicity encouraged several of John's former victims to come forward. A few weeks later, he was back in the media, this time in a full exposé detailing his methods, with interviews from multiple women he had seduced, whose marriages he had destroyed, and whose money he had exploited. When Sandra read the article, she realized just how completely she had been played for a fool. The police never charged him with fraud, but two of his former victims, those with tougher skin, filed civil lawsuits to recover some of their losses. Let's just say, he no longer owns a car or a six-figure bank account. These days, his balance includes 4 digits, and that's counting the numbers after the decimal point. Thank you for being with us. And if you're one of those who watches silently, just leave a like, it helps new stories come to light.